Some men build empires out of dirt and silence, and believe that is enough.
She had come here expecting very little. She had learned to read a room before anyone spoke.
She had seen that kind of arrival before. Confident, unhurried, the kind that meant someone had already decided something.
He had been patient for 15 years. He had the money, he had the board, he had everything he needed. Or so he believed.
She had been told her whole life what she was not. She was about to show him exactly what she was.
Nathaniel Callaway had not slept the night before she arrived. That was the part nobody knew. Not his foreman, not his ranch hands, not the men who respected him from Cheyenne to the Montana border. They all believed Edmund Callaway was a man who moved through life without hesitation, a man who decided and acted and never looked back. But the night before the train came in, he sat at his kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and stared at the letter he had read so many times the paper had gone soft at the folds. Mr. Callaway, I believe you should know something before you decide. I am not the kind of woman men notice when I enter a room. I am not beautiful, but I can cook, I can manage a home, I can work hard, and I know how to care for people. He had received 17 letters from the marriage agency over the past 8 months. 17 women. Some had described their fine educations. Some had listed their family connections. 2 had sent small portrait photographs arranged with careful attention to lighting and posture. Not one of them had written what Nora Hewitt wrote. Not one of them had started a letter by telling him her flaws. Edmund was not a sentimental man. He had not been sentimental since Ruth died. Sentiment was a luxury he had decided he could no longer afford, the way a man in a drought stops watering his flower garden and focuses on keeping the cattle alive. But that letter did something to him he could not name exactly. It was not attraction. It was not excitement. It was more like the feeling of recognizing something true after a long time of reading things that were carefully constructed to sound true. The difference between a man who tells you exactly what the weather is doing outside and a man who tells you what you want to hear so you will like him. He wrote back within 2 days. Come to Wyoming. Let us see what kind of life we can build. That was all. He did not make promises. He did not offer romance. He was honest in his own way, the same way she was honest in hers. And now, the night before her train arrived, he was sitting in the kitchen that had been Ruth's, and he was wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Not because of her letter, because of himself. Because Edmund Callaway was 42 years old and had forgotten how to share a house with another person. His foreman, Declan Sutton, had told him the truth 6 weeks earlier, in the way only a man who has worked beside you for 14 years can tell you the truth. They had been checking feed records in the barn when Declan leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and said it plainly. You know what your problem is? Edmund did not look up. I have several. Your problem is you have arranged your whole life so nothing can touch you. That made him look up. Declan was unbothered by the look he was getting. You built this ranch back up after Ruth. You hired good men. You have got accounts that would make a banker weep with happiness. Everything is in order, and that is the problem. Edmund set down the feed record. Yes, Declan said simply. Because order is not living, and this place has not been living in 6 years. He had thought about that conversation every day since. And now he sat at the kitchen table at midnight and he thought about it again. The kitchen had been Ruth's. That was the honest truth of it. Ruth had loved that kitchen the way some women love a garden, the way she tended and arranged and transformed ingredients into things that made people feel cared for. After she died in 1879, Edmund had kept the kitchen clean because he kept everything on his property clean. But he had not cooked in it. He had eaten what the hired cook prepared, sitting alone at a table built for 12, and he had called that efficiency. Nora Hewitt said she could cook. He did not know why that had mattered to him so much when he read it. Maybe because he missed the smell of bread. Maybe because he missed someone caring enough about a house to make it feel lived in. He did not know. He sat there until the coffee was entirely cold and the moon had shifted across the kitchen window. Then he got up, washed the cup, and went to get dressed for the train station. The platform at Ridgerest Station was a single wooden structure along a track that connected the smaller Wyoming towns to the larger rail lines east and west. The station master, a man named Briggs, was leaning against the wall when Edmund arrived and gave him a long, knowing look. Waiting on someone particular? A passenger. Briggs nodded slowly. Heard you were bringing in a woman. Word travels fast in Ridgecrest. Edmund looked at him without expression. People can remain curious. Briggs smiled and looked away, and Edmund took his position at the end of the platform and waited. He had stood on that platform many times to receive shipments, to see business contacts arrive from the east, once to meet a government land assessor who turned out to be both less intelligent and more corrupt than advertised. He was comfortable on that platform. He knew how to stand on it. He had no idea what he was supposed to feel in the next few minutes. The train arrived at 10 in the morning, iron and steam and the deep mechanical groan of something enormous slowing itself down. Passengers began to step off, a family with 3 children. A man in a suit carrying a leather portfolio, an older woman moving carefully with a cane, and then a brown coat, a worn suitcase. A woman who stepped onto the platform and stopped the way a person stops when they are trying to find something in a place they have never been. Her eyes moved across the platform with a careful, quiet assessment that reminded Edmund of the way he looked at new land. Taking in the details, figuring out what you were working with. She was plain. She had said so in her letter, and she had not been exaggerating. She was not the kind of woman who turned heads or caught the eye. Her face was kind and tired and entirely unadorned. Her coat was clean but had been mended at least twice along the right sleeve. She was carrying that suitcase herself and not looking for someone to carry it for her. She found him before he reached her. Their eyes met across the platform. He watched her face change in the way of someone bracing for bad news. The slight tension in the jaw, the careful blankness. The way she straightened her spine just slightly, as if preparing for something unpleasant that she intended to endure with dignity. She expected him to be disappointed. She had come all this way from Iowa expecting to be sent back. He walked toward her. She held her ground, chin level, eyes steady. Before he could introduce himself, she spoke. "I know what you are doing." She said it without hostility, without performance. Just a woman stating a fact to a man she had never met. "You are looking me over and reconsidering, I understand that. But I did not come all this way to make it easier for you to say no. I came because you wrote back. And that meant something, so here I am." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. "I was going to introduce myself," he said. Something flickered in her face. "Then I apologize." She shifted the suitcase to her other hand. "I have learned to assume the worst and count it a gift when I am wrong. That seems like an exhausting way to live." She looked at him directly, not coyly, not with performance, just looking at him, taking his measure the same way he was taking hers. "I suppose it is," she said finally. "But it has kept me from being surprised by disappointment too many times." Edmund reached out for the suitcase. She looked at his hand, looked at the case, and then looked back at his face as if she was deciding whether this was kindness or pity, and whether she could tell the difference right now. She let him take it. They walked to the wagon in silence. He respected that she did not talk to fill space. He helped her up to the seat and took the reins, and they had been moving for perhaps 3 minutes when she spoke. "I should tell you something before we arrive." "All right, I know what I look like. I know what people think when they look at me and then look at your ranch and try to put those two things together." She was watching the road ahead. "I am not going to pretend to be something I am not to make that easier for you. I did not ask you to." "No," she agreed. "You did not. But most men, most people, they appreciate it when a woman softens her edges a little, makes things more comfortable. Comfortable is not something I have set much store by." She turned to look at him. He could feel the weight of her attention. "What do you set store by?" she asked. He thought about it the way he thought about everything, fully before he spoke. "Honesty," he said. "Work. A person who does what they say and says what they mean." The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. "Not quite. Then we may get along better than either of us expected." They arrived at Callaway Ranch at midday. Declan Sutton was waiting in the yard, not conspicuously, but waiting. He was checking a fence line along the front of the property, which was work that could have been done by any of a dozen men, and which he had chosen to do personally this morning. Edmund knew exactly what that meant and chose not to comment on it. When the wagon pulled in, Declan straightened up. Nora climbed down before Edmund could assist her, and she stood in the yard and looked at the house. It was a large house, 2 stories, solid construction, 6 years of care and investment visible in every beam and shutter. The kind of house that said this man has built something and means to keep it standing. But Nora was not looking at the grandness of it. Edmund watched her face. She was looking at the windows. One of them on the ground floor had a shutter hinge that had rusted and tilted the shutter at a slight angle. She noticed it immediately. She looked at the porch. 3 of the boards needed replacing, which he had known for 2 seasons but considered low priority. She looked at the flower beds along the front that had been cleared of weeds but were otherwise empty, the way a face is clean but without any expression. She was not cataloging the wealth. She was seeing the neglect. Not cruel neglect, not careless neglect. The neglect of a man who kept everything functional and could not remember when functional stopped being enough. "It is a fine house," she said. "It is a house," Edmund said. "I am hoping you will make it a home." She looked at him sideways. He had not meant for that to come out quite so directly, and he suspected his face showed it, because the almost smile appeared again. "Give me a few weeks," she said quietly. Declan cleared his throat and stepped forward, hat in hand. "Declan Sutton, foreman." "Nora Hewitt," she said, and shook his hand with the firm grip of someone who had worked with their hands for a very long time. "How many men on the ranch?" Declan blinked. He had clearly expected a different opening question. 23 currently. 6 full-time in the house operation, the rest in the fields and cattle work. "And where does everyone eat?" "There is a kitchen building off the main house. Cook comes in 3 times a week. Men make do otherwise." Nora set her suitcase down in the dirt of the yard. "Starting tomorrow," she said, "everyone eats properly." She picked the suitcase back up. "Can you show me where I will be staying?" Declan, who was not a man easily flustered, looked mildly flustered. He led her inside. Edmund stood in the yard alone for a moment. He did not know what he had expected. Something tentative, maybe. A woman moving carefully through a new place, afraid to take up too much space. Nora Hewitt had walked into his ranch and within 10 minutes had announced a change to the meal schedule for 23 men. He found himself almost smiling. He could not remember the last time he had almost smiled. The first evening was uncomfortable, the way most first evenings are uncomfortable. They sat at the long dining table, the table built for 12 that usually held only one, and Edmund could feel the size of the room around them and all the silence that lived in it. Nora had found bread in the kitchen and made soup from the provisions available. Nothing elaborate, but it was hot and seasoned properly, and it tasted like food made by someone who understood that food was supposed to make people feel better. He had not tasted that in a long time. "This is good," he said. "It is what was available." She broke a piece of bread without looking up. "Tomorrow will be better." "I was not complaining. I know you were not. I was informing you." He looked at her. She kept her eyes on her bowl, and he had the distinct impression that she was slightly amused by the look she knew he was giving her. "Do you always do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Say exactly what you mean." She looked up. "Is there another way?" "Most people coat things a little. Make them go down easier. I have found that usually helps the person saying the thing more than the person hearing it. The coating, I mean. It makes the speaker feel kinder without actually being kinder." She took a sip of water. "I would rather just say what is true." Edmund was quiet for a moment. "My wife was like that," he said. He had not meant to say it. He heard himself say it and recognized immediately that it was exactly the kind of thing he did not say. The kind of territory he had kept locked and fenced for 6 years. But it had come out and he could not take it back, and he sat with it. Nora did not push, did not lean forward with sympathy, did not perform compassion. She just said, "She sounds like she was a good person." She was. A pause. "I am sorry you lost her." "Thank you," Edmund said, and somehow that was enough. No more was needed. Nora went back to her soup and Edmund went back to his, and the silence that came after was not the heavy silence of avoidance, but something closer to the comfortable silence of two people who did not need to fill every moment with performance. He noticed it. He did not say anything about it, but he noticed. The trouble started the next morning. Not disaster, not yet, but the first sign that Nora Hewitt's arrival at Callaway Ranch was not going to pass without the kind of attention that other people's choices always attracted in a small community. He came downstairs to find that she had been up since before 5. The kitchen, Ruth's kitchen, the room that had been functional and sterile and empty of everything but basic utility for 6 years, was warm. Not just from the stove. Warm the way a room is warm when someone has put care into it. The coffee was strong and hot. There were biscuits on the table, and the smell of something cooking that reminded him so sharply of mornings with Ruth that he stopped in the doorway and had to take a breath before he could step inside. 3 of his ranch hands were already at the table. Not the table in the separate eating area where the hired cook left food 3 times a week. The kitchen table, which was in the house. Jake and Amos and a new hire named Cody sitting at his kitchen table with coffee cups, and Nora was moving between the stove and the counter with the settled efficiency of a woman entirely at home in a kitchen. "Morning," she said to Edmund without looking up from the eggs she was turning. "Coffee is on the counter. Biscuits are done. I am finishing eggs for the early crew, and then I will start the main breakfast." Jake looked up at Edmund with the cautious expression of a man who was not sure whether he was in trouble. "She invited us in," he said. "I can see that," Edmund said. "Is that all right?" Edmund looked at Nora, who had still not looked up from the stove. "Mr. Callaway," she said, answering the question he had not yet asked, "your men have been eating cold provisions and whatever they can scrape together on the days the cook does not come. Jake here has a shoulder that needs rest, and he has been hauling feed because he cannot ask for a lighter assignment without feeling like he is letting everyone down. Amos makes his coffee every morning at 4 over a camp stove because he gets up early and does not want to wait. And Cody is 19 years old, has been here 6 weeks, and nobody has told him yet where the flour is kept in the supply building." She set the eggs on a plate and put it in front of Amos. "I know their names," she continued, still without drama, still with the same quiet directness Edmund was already recognizing as simply the way she was. "Because I asked them." Edmund looked at Jake, who was very carefully not making eye contact with him. He looked at Cody, who appeared to have decided that Christmas had come early. He looked at Amos, who was already halfway through his eggs. "It is all right," Edmund said. He poured his own coffee and sat down. Nora put biscuits in front of him. "You need to tell Jake to rest that shoulder," she said. 2 days minimum. He does not take orders from me about his health. He would if they came from you." Edmund looked at Jake, who was now deeply interested in his biscuit. "Jake," Edmund said, "I am fine, sir. You are going to rest that shoulder for 2 days, or I am going to find work for you that involves sitting down, which you will hate significantly more." Jake's jaw set. "I do not need 2 days." Edmund said nothing else. The silence held. Jake looked at Nora. Nora looked at her stove. "Do not look at her," Edmund said. "Look at me." "Yes, sir," Jake muttered. Nora, still facing the stove, allowed herself a small smile that no one but Edmund was positioned to see. He noticed. He looked back at his coffee. By the end of the first week, the kitchen had become something Edmund did not have a word for. It had become the center. Ranch hands who had been strangers to each other's names were sitting together at meals. Arguments that had been simmering between men, the particular low-grade friction that built up when people worked closely in difficult conditions and had nowhere to release it, were coming up in conversation and getting resolved. Sometimes sharply, sometimes with laughter, but getting resolved instead of festering. Edmund watched this happen and could not quite trace the mechanism. He finally asked Declan. They were checking cattle in the east pasture, and Edmund said, "What is happening in the bunkhouse?" Declan looked at him. In what sense? The men seemed different. Declan was quiet for a moment, looking at the cattle. "You know what was wrong before? Before she came. Tell me." The men did not have anywhere that felt like belonging. They worked for you. They respected you. But you do not. He paused, choosing words carefully. You do not make people feel like they are part of something. You make them feel like they are doing a job. She makes them feel like they are part of something. Edmund turned that over. "There is a difference," Declan added. "I can see there is. She knows their names inside 2 days. She knows Jake's shoulder. She knows Amos gets up at 4. She knows Cody has never been away from home before." Declan shook his head slowly. Nobody has noticed those men in years. Maybe ever. Edmund did not say anything. That night he sat in the kitchen after supper and watched Nora clearing up and thought about what Declan had said. He thought about how 6 years could pass, and a man could run an operation this size and never once think about whether his people felt like they belonged to it. "Nora," he said. She turned from the counter. "The men," he said. "They like you. They are good men." She turned back to the dishes. "They just needed someone to notice that. I should have noticed." She did not answer right away. She finished the cup she was washing, set it carefully, and then she turned to face him. "You were keeping things running," she said. "That matters. It is not the same as everything, but it matters. The men know that too. That is generous of you." "It is accurate," she said. "There is a difference." And that was the thing about Nora Hewitt. He was beginning to understand it. She did not comfort with softness. She comforted with precision. She told you what was actually true, and what was actually true was almost always more bearable than what your worst thoughts were telling you. He thought about that for a long time after she had gone to bed. He thought, "I have been living with a stranger for 8 days, and I do not feel like I am living with a stranger." He thought, "That is either very good or very dangerous, and I am not sure I can tell the difference tonight." He blew out the lamp and went upstairs. And for the first time in 6 years, he fell asleep thinking about something other than the ranch. The visitor arrived on a Tuesday afternoon without being invited, which apparently was something she did because her own position in the county meant that most doors were open to her by default. Vivien Aldredge was 26 years old, the only daughter of Harlan Aldredge, and by general agreement among the people of Ridgerest County, she was one of the most striking women in Wyoming territory. She had arrived in a well-appointed buggy with a basket of peach preserves and the smooth, confident ease of someone who had been welcomed in fine homes her entire life. Nora was in the kitchen when Vivien came through the door, and Edmund, who had been coming in from the north field for the midday meal, arrived just in time to see the two women in the same room for the first time. Vivien's eyes moved around the kitchen with the quick, cataloging attention of someone assessing a situation she had not expected to find in quite this condition. The kitchen was warm and occupied and alive in a way that the Callaway kitchen had not been in 6 years. There was bread cooling on the counter. There was color in the room that had not been there before. And in the middle of all of it stood a woman who was, by any conventional measure, entirely unremarkable to look at. "Mrs. Callaway," Vivien said, recovering smoothly. "I have been meaning to call since I heard the news. I am Vivien Aldredge. Our families have been neighbors a long time." "Miss Aldredge," Nora said pleasantly and kept her hands busy at the counter because she worked best when her hands were occupied. "Can I offer you coffee?" Vivien set the basket on the table and sat down without being asked. "I brought some of our peach preserves. We had an exceptional harvest this year. That is kind of you. I hope you are settling in well. Wyoming must be quite a change from Iowa." "It is," Nora said. "I like it." Vivien's eyes moved around the kitchen again, taking in the changes. "You have made this place quite comfortable. I have tried to make it useful, of course." Vivien accepted the coffee Nora set in front of her with the automatic grace of someone who had been served things her entire life. "Nathaniel must be pleased. You would have to ask him." Vivien smiled. It was a practiced smile, Edmund thought, watching from the doorway where neither woman had noticed him yet. It arrived too quickly and stayed too precisely. "How are you finding life on the ranch, truly? I imagine it can feel quite isolated for someone from outside the territory." "I have been busy," Nora said. She turned back to the counter. "We are planning the county gathering here this year." A pause. "Here?" Vivien said. Edmund thought it was time to bring the community to the ranch properly. Nora continued without looking up. "I am organizing the food." Another pause, longer this time. "That is quite an undertaking," Vivien said. "The county gathering usually happens at the Ridgecrest meeting hall." "It usually does. Nathaniel did not mention this to my father. I imagine he has been busy." Nora turned now and Edmund watched her face. She leaned against the counter with her arms loose at her sides and looked at Vivien Aldredge with the same clear, assessing look she gave to everything she needed to understand.
Is there something I can help you with, Miss Aldredge?
The practiced smile again. "I just wanted to introduce myself properly. Welcome you to the community." "That is very kind." Nora's voice was pleasant and entirely without warmth in the direction of sentiment. "Our families have known each other a long time. Edmund speaks well of your father." Something moved behind Vivien's eyes. Not quite disappointment. Something more complicated than disappointment. Yes, she said. My father thinks very highly of Edmund. I will tell him you called, Nora said pleasantly. I know he would want to know. Vivien left 20 minutes later, taking her basket of peach preserves back with her because Nora had declined to accept them, politely but clearly, on the grounds that the ranch's larder was already well supplied. Edmund stepped out of the doorway and into the kitchen. Nora glanced at him. How long were you standing there? Long enough. She turned back to what she had been doing. He could see it in the line of her back, the thing she was keeping below the surface of her expression. Not anger. Something older and more complicated than anger. She came to see what you had chosen, Nora said. I know, I understand that. I would have done the same in her position. She kept her voice even. Whatever was between your family and the Aldredge family before I arrived, that is yours. I am only telling you what the visit was. Nothing was between Vivien Aldredge and me, Edmund said. Her father may have had ideas. She may have had expectations. I never gave her reason for them. Nora was quiet for a moment. I believe you, she said. You do not need to explain yourself. She upset you. She reminded me of something I already knew. Her voice was careful and flat and entirely honest. That some people will always look at me and see what is missing instead of what is there. I am used to it. She paused. That does not mean I enjoy it. Edmund did not know what to say to that. He was more comfortable with problems he could solve than with feelings he could only witness. But he stepped further into the kitchen instead of stepping back, and he stood beside her at the counter, and he said, What do you need counted in the supply room? She looked at him. The flour inventory, she said after a moment. Tell me what to write. She called out the numbers, and he wrote them in the ledger in the large, impractical scroll that was his handwriting, and she glanced at it once and did not comment. And they worked through the rest of the supply room together in a silence that was, as their silences tended to be, more communicative than most people's conversations. When they were done, she closed the ledger. Declan thinks you should go to the Aldredge gathering next week, she said. Declan can think whatever he likes. He is right, though. She held the ledger against her chest. You need Harlan Aldredge goodwill in the county right now. You know his connections better than I do. You want me to go to an Aldredge gathering. I want you to go and I want you to take me. She met his eyes directly. If you go without me, it looks like you are apologizing for your choice. If you go with me, it looks like there is nothing to apologize for. She looked at him steadily. There is not anything to apologize for, is there? No, Edmund said. There is not. Then take me to meet your neighbors, she said. And tell Declan he was right. He will be insufferable about it for a week, but he deserves to know. She walked out of the supply room. Edmund stood there a moment in the room that smelled of flour and dried herbs, holding the ledger she had handed him. He thought, I have never in my adult life met a person who thinks the way she thinks, and I am not entirely sure yet whether that is the most reassuring or the most alarming thing that has ever happened to me. He put the ledger on the shelf. He went to find Declan. The Aldredge gathering was held on a Saturday and was exactly the kind of event Edmund had always endured rather than enjoyed. Large, expensive, and organized for the purpose of demonstrating the Aldredge family's position in the county rather than for the pleasure of the people attending. Harlan Aldredge was a big man in his early 60s, red-faced and expansive, with the particular confidence of someone who had been wealthy long enough that he had forgotten there was any other way to be. He shook Edmund's hand at the door with what appeared to be genuine warmth. His eyes moved immediately to Nora, Mrs. Callaway. He took her hand with a slight bow. Harlan Aldredge, I have been looking forward to meeting the woman who finally convinced this man to do something sensible. Nora smiled. Mr. Aldredge, Edmund speaks well of you, does he? He never speaks well of anyone. He must like you very much. Harlan laughed at his own joke. Edmund did not visibly react, which was also a kind of reaction. The gathering was full of people who had a way of looking at Nora. That brief assessment, that recalibration, that polite neutrality settling over their faces that was its own kind of verdict. She had seen it at every point in her life where she had been somewhere she was not expected. She had learned that the only answer to it was to be so genuinely herself that people eventually had to respond to the actual person instead of their expectation of her. She talked to people. She asked real questions, not social ones. She asked the grain merchant about his supply lines. She asked an elderly rancher named Prentice about the drought conditions he had been describing to Edmund. And she asked a follow-up question that made Prentice stop mid-sentence and look at her with real attention. Where did you learn about water tables, he asked. My grandfather was a farmer in Ohio, she said. Bad years taught us more than good years. Prentice looked at her for a long moment. You are Callaway's wife. I am. He did well, Prentice said bluntly. Better than most of them expected. Before she could respond, she heard Vivien's voice behind her. Mrs. Callaway. Vivien appeared at her elbow with the smooth social motion of someone who had grown up in rooms like this. Are you enjoying yourself? Very much. Nora said it without subtext because it was true, and because she did not have the energy for subtext. You have a beautiful home. Vivien seemed almost thrown by the absence of calculation in it. Thank you. She glanced toward where Edmund was talking with her father. He looks well. I do not think I have seen him this present at a gathering in years. He has been working hard. He deserves an evening away from the ranch. Yes. Vivien's eyes stayed on him a moment longer. Then she looked at Nora. Can I ask you something directly? Of course. Did you know about this ranch before you wrote the letter? Did you know what it was worth? Nora looked at her, not with anger, with the clean attention she gave to questions that deserved to be taken seriously. I knew he had land and cattle. That is what the agency told me. I did not know the size of it until I arrived. She paused. Is that what you wanted to know? Vivien's jaw tightened. I suppose I am wondering if you understand what you have. I understand what I have, Nora said quietly. I'm not sure it is what you think I have. He is one of the wealthiest men in the territory. Yes. Nora looked across the room at Edmund, at the line of his shoulders, at the particular way he was listening to Harlan Aldredge, that complete unhurried attention he gave to things that mattered to him. But what I have is not the ranch. Vivien was quiet. I have a man who listens to me, Nora said. I have a man who handed me a bank letter because he decided I was someone he could share hard things with. I have a man who came into a supply room and wrote numbers in a ledger because he did not know how to say he was sorry that my feelings had been hurt. She looked back at Vivien. That is what I have, and I do not imagine that is what you were planning for. Vivien stared at her. Nora smiled, not the polite smile, the real one. Thank you for the gathering. The food is very good. She moved away toward Edmund. On the drive home, she told him what had happened, not because she needed his defense or his reassurance. She told him because they had agreed without ever explicitly saying it that they were going to tell each other the truth, and this was part of the truth of that evening. He listened. He kept his eyes on the road and his hands on the reins, and he listened. When she finished, the wagon was quiet for a moment. What she asked you, he said, about whether you knew what the ranch was worth. Yes. Did that bother you? Yes, she said. And no. She thought about it. It bothered me the way it always bothers me when someone assumes the worst about my reasons. But I understand why, she asked. From where she is standing, I am someone she cannot explain. And people invent explanations for things they cannot explain. You told her what you actually have. I told her the truth. He was quiet. Was that wrong? She asked. No, his voice was low. No, it was not wrong. The wagon moved through the dark. The night was cold and enormous, the kind of Wyoming sky that reminded you how small you were. All those stars and all that black. And Nora sat beside him and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safe. Not because of the wealth. Not because of the ranch. Because of the man beside her who took up exactly the amount of space he needed and no more. Who did not perform anything. Who was simply and entirely himself. Complicated and closed off and gradually, slowly, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed for years, letting in light. I need to tell you something, Edmund said. She waited. The bank situation is worse than I said last week. She kept her expression still. How much worse? He told her the numbers. They were serious. Not catastrophic, not yet. But the margin was thinner than he had let on, and the timeline was tighter, and there was a real possibility that if the cattle market did not improve before fall, they would be facing decisions she needed to know about. She listened to all of it. She did not panic. She just took it in the way she took in everything, with the careful, steady attention of someone who had survived hard things by facing them directly. Why are you telling me now? She asked. He thought about that for a moment. Because you told Vivien Aldredge that you are someone I share hard things with, he said, and I decided that I should make that true, not just something you say, something I actually do. She felt something move in her chest. Then we will figure it out, she said. Together, he said. Together, she agreed. The wagon moved through the Wyoming night, and neither of them said anything else, and the silence between them was the kind that builds something instead of leaving something empty. And Nora Hewitt, who had come to Wyoming expecting to be tolerated, sat in the dark beside the man who had written back and felt, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, that the life she was living was actually, genuinely hers. 3 days after the Aldredge gathering, the letter arrived. It came with a stack of ordinary correspondence, accounts payable, a note from his cattle broker in Cheyenne, an update from a land surveyor working the eastern boundary. Edmund opened them in order, the way he did everything, methodically, without hurry, standing at his desk in the late morning light. He opened the bank letter last. He read it twice. Then he set it down and stood very still for a long moment. The bank was calling in a portion of his operating loan. Not all of it, not immediately, but the cattle market report had been poor, and the board was nervous, and they wanted partial repayment within 90 days. 90 days. He ran the numbers in his head without needing to open the books. He knew them the way he knew the weight of a fence post or the distance from the north pasture to the creek. The numbers were not good, not catastrophic. He had survived worse, but not good. He put the letter in his desk drawer. He did not tell anyone. That was his habit. Absorb the problem. Assess the problem. Solve the problem quietly and alone. Never let anyone see the weight of a difficulty until it was already behind you. He was very good at it. He was also, as he was beginning to suspect, very tired of it. That evening, Nora brought supper to the study because she had noticed he had not come to the table. He did not know how she had noticed. He had not said anything. She set the tray on his desk without being asked, and then stood reading his face the way a woman reads weather. What has happened, she said. Nothing that needs discussion tonight, all right? She did not move toward the door. Is it something I should know about? He looked at her. She stood there with the same quality she always had. Not pushing, not performing concern, just present, just available, just asking directly what most people would spend an hour dancing around. He pulled the letter from the drawer and handed it to her. She read it. Her expression did not change dramatically. No panic, no despair. But he could see her processing it, see the careful intelligence behind her eyes working through the implications. "How long have you known the cattle market was softening?" she asked. "A few months. And you were managing it?" "I was managing it." She handed the letter back. "You will manage this too, most likely. But it would be easier with two people thinking about it." He looked at her. "I know I am not a businesswoman," Nora said. "I know I do not understand cattle markets and bank loans the way you do. But I know how to think through a problem." And she stopped, studied something in herself. "I am your wife, Edmund. That means I am your partner if you will let me be." The word partner. He had not thought of marriage in those terms in a very long time. He had thought of companionship, of household management, of two people coexisting with a reasonable degree of respect. But partnership was a different word entirely. "Tell me what you are thinking," he said. Nora sat down across the desk from him and began to talk. She did not have immediate answers. She was honest about that. She did not pretend to understand cattle futures or land valuations or the particular rhythms of Wyoming beef markets. But she asked questions, smart questions, the kind that came from someone who understood systems, even if not this specific system. And through her questions, she made him think through things more carefully than he had been thinking when he was alone with the problem. By the end of an hour, he had a clearer picture of his options than he had possessed at the beginning of the evening. Not a solution, not yet, but clarity. "The county gathering," she said. He frowned. "What about it?" "There is one scheduled for next month." She leaned forward slightly. "People come from all over the territory. Merchants, ranchers, the people with money to invest and decisions to make about where they place their confidence." She looked at him steadily. "I know what a county gathering is," Edmund said. "I am asking if you have ever used one to build relationships rather than simply attend it." He opened his mouth, closed it. The truth was that he attended the county gathering every year the way he attended church, as a civic obligation, with his hat on and his best coat and his most neutral expression. And he shook hands and spoke when spoken to and left as soon as it was polite to do so. "I tend to keep to myself at those events," he admitted. "I know," Nora said. "Declan told me. Declan talks too much. Declan is worried about you and has been for years." She said it without accusation. "So is everyone who works here. They just do not know how to say it to you because you have arranged your life so that people feel they should not." Edmund was quiet. "The gathering," she continued. "Let me cook for it." He looked at her. "You want to cook for the county gathering. I want to cook for it the way it has never been cooked for before." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not excitement exactly. More like the calm certainty of a person who knows precisely what they are capable of. "You need people to see Callaway Ranch as more than a successful cattle operation. You need them to see it as the center of something, a community anchor, somewhere that belongs to this territory the way a landmark belongs to a landscape. And food does that. Food is the oldest language there is." He looked at her across the desk. His wife, the plain woman from Iowa who had arrived with one suitcase and the expectation of disappointment. The woman who had walked into his ranch and within 1 week made his men feel seen, made his kitchen feel alive, and was now sitting across from him talking about community strategy and human connection, as if she had been doing it her whole life. She probably had been. He just had not known where to look for it. "All right," Edmund said. She looked at him. "Plan the gathering," he said. "Do it the way you want to do it. Whatever you need, supplies, help, time, you have it." Something moved across her face. It was not triumph. It was not relief. It was something quieter and more complicated. Something that made him realize she had not been entirely certain he would say yes. That even now, even after weeks of this, she was still waiting for the moment when he would decide she was not worth the investment. "Thank you," she said. "You do not need to thank me. I know I do not need to." She stood, smoothing her apron with the habitual gesture he had come to recognize as something she did when she was containing an emotion. "But I want to." She left his study. He sat at his desk in the lamplight and thought about the word partner, and thought about how the thing he had believed he had lost forever, the particular feeling of not being entirely alone in the world, had appeared in his house and surprised him thoroughly, and was currently planning a supper that might save his ranch. He was not sure what to do with that. He was fairly sure that for the first time in 6 years he was curious to find out. The morning after Edmund said yes to the gathering, Nora was up before 4, not because she was anxious, because she was thinking, and when Nora was thinking she needed her hands to be doing something. Thinking without her hands occupied was how she ended up lying in the dark cataloging everything that could go wrong, and she had learned a long time ago that the dark had a way of making things seem larger and more permanent than they actually were. So she made bread. She made 3 loaves before the sun came up, and she worked through what she knew and what she needed to know and what the shape of the next 6 weeks had to look like. She thought about the county gathering. She thought about the people who would come. She thought about Edmund sitting in his study with that bank letter in his hand, absorbing it alone, the way he absorbed everything, carrying it the way a man carries a stone he has convinced himself he deserves to carry. She thought about the word she had introduced, and he had taken up without comment. Partner. She thought about how much she wanted to be that. Not for the ranch, not for the money or the security or any of the practical reasons a woman in her position might have for wanting to make herself indispensable to a wealthy man. She had been honest with herself about that a long time ago, in the weeks after she had sent the letter and was waiting for his reply, examining her own motives with the same direct assessment she applied to everything else. She wanted it because she was good at it. She was good at seeing what people needed. She was good at making things work. She was good at building something out of the ordinary materials of daily life. And she had spent 30 years being good at those things in contexts where no one had room to appreciate them. She punched the dough down and started the second shape. The problem was this: she liked him. She had not expected to like him. She had expected a transaction, a reasonable man, a manageable arrangement. She had not expected someone whose grief was so fully formed and so quietly carried that it made her recognize something she had seen before in the mirror. The expression of a person who had made peace with loss by convincing themselves they did not need what they had lost. She had not expected to see herself in him. That was the part that made everything complicated. She put the loaves in the oven and sat down with her coffee, and she told herself what she always told herself when things got complicated. Deal with what is in front of you, one thing at a time. Today, the thing in front of you is the gathering. And the gathering is how you help, and helping is what you know how to do. She got out her paper and began to write a list. By the time the men started coming in for breakfast, she had 3 pages covered in her small, careful handwriting and a plan that was either going to be the best thing she had ever done or the most public failure of her life. She chose not to think about which. She told Edmund over breakfast. He came in when most of the men were already seated, and she set his coffee in front of him and took the chair across the table. She had stopped waiting to be invited to sit because waiting to be invited in your own house was a habit she was leaving behind. She put her 3 pages in front of him. He picked up the first page and read without comment, taking it in completely before responding. "You want to invite the Harcourt brothers," he said. "They control grain distribution for the eastern part of the territory. We have an existing relationship with their competitors. I know. That is why inviting them matters." She kept her voice level. "You want people to see Callaway Ranch as neutral ground, somewhere that belongs to the whole community, not just to one set of business interests." He turned to the second page. 200 people, he said. "Minimum. The gathering usually draws that many anyway. I am not suggesting we create something from nothing. I am suggesting we make this year's gathering happen here, at this ranch, and make it something people remember." Why would people come here specifically? Because of what I am planning to cook. The men at the table had gone slightly quiet. Not obviously. They were all looking at their plates with great attention. But the room was listening. Edmund set down the pages. "Tell me." So she told him. She talked about the menu she was planning, not just food. A particular kind of food that did not exist anywhere else in this territory, because it required skills that most cooks in Wyoming did not have. The preservation techniques and the particular bread traditions she had learned from her mother's mother and refined over 10 years of cooking for other people. She talked about what she could make from the ranch's own larder and what she would need to source and what she would need help with. She talked for about 12 minutes without stopping. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Declan, who was sitting at the end of the table, set down his coffee cup. "I want to eat at this gathering," he said. 2 of the other men laughed. Edmund looked at the pages again. "You will need help. I will need 4 women who can follow direction and are not afraid of hard work. I know 4 women exactly like that." He turned to Declan. "Talk to your wife and the Pembroke sisters if they are available, and 1 other woman with real cooking experience." Declan nodded. "And Nora." Edmund looked at her. "Whatever you need from the supply account, you have it." She had prepared herself to argue for that. She had a whole second argument ready about the return on investment and the community goodwill and the business case, because she had assumed he would need to be convinced on the expense. He had not needed convincing. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet." He stood. "Make worth the trouble," she thought. "I intend to." The trouble she had not planned for arrived on a Wednesday. His name was Preston Holt, and he came from the bank in Cheyenne with a leather satchel and a manner that was professionally pleasant in the particular way of men who practiced pleasantness as a tool rather than expressing it as a quality. Edmund had mentioned that a bank representative would be coming to review the account documentation. "Routine," he said. Nora had nodded and said nothing, but she watched Preston Holt the way she watched everything that came into this house. From an angle, quietly, while appearing to be occupied with something else entirely. Holt was in the study with Edmund for 2 hours. At one point, Declan came to fetch Edmund for something in the north pasture, and Edmund stepped out, leaving Holt alone in the study for 7 minutes. 7 minutes was long enough for a man who knew what he was looking for to find what he needed. Nora noted the 7 minutes the way she noted everything that might matter later. When Holt left, she watched his buggy go down the road. Then she went into the kitchen and stood for a moment and thought about the practiced pleasantness of his manner and the specific nature of his questions during the brief exchange she had witnessed, and the particular way his eyes had moved around the room when he thought no one was watching him. She did not say anything to Edmund that evening. She did not have enough yet. but she filed it with the same careful attention she gave to things that did not yet have a shape, but felt like they were becoming one. The letter appeared in the supply building on a Friday morning. Declan found it behind the grain ledger. He did not come to Edmund with it first. He came to Nora. That told her everything she needed to know about how serious it was, because Declan Sutton had been bringing problems to Edmund Callaway for 14 years, and he had never once in those 14 years gone to anyone else first. She read it standing in the supply building with Declan watching her face. It was short, 8 lines written in a hand she did not recognize, addressed to no one, signed by no one, but the content was precise enough that it had not needed a signature. It described the terms of Edmund's bank loan with a specificity that was not public knowledge. It described his current shortfall with an accuracy that made her jaw tighten. And it ended with 4 words that were not a threat so much as a statement of intent. The ranch will sell. She folded it. Who has seen this? She said. Just me, Declan said. Now you. She went to find Edmund. She found him in the east pasture, and she walked out to him without hesitation, because she had decided on the way that this could not wait for a better moment. She held out the folded paper when she reached him. Declan found this in the supply building this morning, she said, behind the grain ledger. He thinks was placed there deliberately. Edmund took it and read it. He read it twice. He folded it. His face had the particular stillness of a man absorbing something he had not seen coming but immediately recognized as serious. Who has seen this? Declan, me, now you. No one else. No one else. He was already moving. She kept pace beside him without being asked. Someone inside this ranch put that there, she said, or someone with access to it. He kept his voice flat, factual, the way he handled bad things. The terms of my loan are not something a stranger guesses. That is information from the bank documents. Or from your study, Nora said. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. Who has been in your study recently, she asked. He thought. His study was not a room he opened casually. The men on his property had been with him long enough to know that the study was Edmund Callaway's private territory. Preston Holt, he said slowly. 3 weeks ago. Who sent him? The bank. Or, he stopped. Or the letter came through the bank manager's office, Nora said. But the manager did not select the representative himself. She kept her voice even. The representative was sent by the board. And who sits on the board? He was quiet for a long moment. Harlan Aldredge, he said. The name landed between them like something dropped from a great height. She did not react visibly. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything. Then she said, is Harlan Aldredge capable of this? Edmund started walking again. 6 months ago, I would have said no. He paused. Now I am looking at a letter that contains information only the bank and my own household should have, and Harlan Aldredge is on the bank board, and he sent a representative into my study 3 weeks ago. He pushed through the gate into the yard. I do not know what I would say now. Declan was waiting by the barn. Edmund walked up to him directly. Preston Holt, he said. You remember him, Henderson, Declan said. I walked him to the facilities and back, but you were already in there with him. Before I got there, I put him in the study and went to get you from the north pasture. He looked at the folded paper in Edmund's hand. That is bad. Yes. How bad? Declan asked. Edmund looked at him. Someone is building a case for the bank to call the full loan. If they can demonstrate that the ranch is in financial distress, and they have the numbers to do that now, they can go to the board and argue for immediate repayment. He kept his voice flat. If the loan gets called in full, I cannot pay it. Not in the timeline they would give me. I would have to sell land. Declan stared at him. How much land? Enough, Edmund said. He turned to Nora. The gathering is still happening. She had been listening. Of course it is. I want it moved up. 1 week less of preparation. She blinked. 1 week, I know what I am asking. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. I can do it, she said. I will need 1 more woman and I will need the supply order placed today. Done. He turned back to Declan. I need you to find out everything you can about Preston Holt and his connection to the Aldredge family. Quietly, nothing leaves this yard. Declan nodded. He walked. Edmund stood in the yard with Nora, and for a moment he let himself feel the full weight of it. Not long, just enough to know what he was carrying so he could carry it properly. They are trying to take the ranch, he said. Yes, she said. Through the bank. Legal and clean. Nothing I can fight directly. Not through the bank, she agreed. But there are other ways to fight. He looked at her. The gathering, she said. Edmund who comes to the county gathering. Everyone. Everyone with money, everyone with standing, everyone who makes decisions about what gets invested, where and which operations are worth backing. She stepped closer, not with urgency, but with the particular clarity of someone who has seen something others have not yet seen. If Callaway Ranch is seen as the center of this community, if the people at that gathering go home remembering that Edmund Callaway is the man this territory is built around, then no bank board can move quietly against you without the entire county noticing. He stared at her. You cannot fight it in a bank, she said. You fight it in a room full of people. He stood there with the letter in his hand and the weight of the last hour pressing down on him, and he thought about what kind of woman thought like that, what kind of person saw that angle. And he thought, I have been trying to solve this problem alone for months, and this woman has been here 6 weeks, and she just found the door. The gathering, he said. The gathering, she confirmed. All right, he put the letter in his coat. Then let us make it one they never forget. She worked in the days that followed with a focused, sustained intensity that made even the hardest workers on the ranch stop and watch sometimes. Not because it was remarkable for a woman to work hard, because the quality of her concentration was something different. She was not rushing, she was not frantic, she was moving at the pace of someone who had calculated exactly what needed to happen and in what order, and was executing it without waste. She had 4 women helping her. Declan's wife Ruth Ann, a compact and capable woman who took direction without ego. The Pembroke sisters, Ada and June, who had grown up in a restaurant family and could produce volume without losing quality. And a woman named Bess Whitfield, who had cooked for a cattle drive for 3 seasons, and had the particular skill of making good food under conditions that would have broken a lesser cook. Nora ran her kitchen the way Edmund ran his ranch. Clear expectation, direct communication, no room for pretense. Ruth Ann told Declan that first evening that she had never worked for someone who made her feel so simultaneously capable and absolutely clear about what was needed. Declan told Edmund. Edmund said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved. Meanwhile, Edmund was doing his own work. The invisible work of a man who knew a battle was coming and was building his defenses before the other side could move. He sent letters to 3 men he's trusted in Cheyenne, asking careful questions about Preston Holt and the bank board's recent activities. He called in 2 favors he had been holding for years, from men who owed him enough to give honest information without asking why he needed it. And every evening he came into the kitchen, not because he needed to, not to check on the preparations. He came because the kitchen had become the place on his ranch where he could breathe, and he had only recently admitted to himself that the reason for that was the woman who ran it. They had developed a ritual without planning one. You would come in, pour coffee, sit at the end of the counter, and they would talk. About the gathering, about the ranch, about whatever needed saying. Sometimes it was practical. Sometimes it went somewhere else entirely. "Tell me about Ruth," she said one evening. He looked up from his coffee. She was rolling pastry, her hands steady and practiced. "You mention her sometimes in the middle of other things," Nora said. "The way people mention someone they still talk to in their head. I wondered what she was like." "You do not have to." He was quiet for a moment. He could have deflected. He was very good at deflecting. But he thought about what he had told himself on the wagon ride home from the Aldredges gathering. That partner was not something you said, it was something you did. He set down his cup. "She was funny," he said. "People always looked at her and expected serious because she had a serious face. But she had the driest sense of humor of anyone I ever knew. She would say something so deadpan that you would be 3 sentences further into the conversation before you realized she had made a joke. And by then she would be looking at you with that expression." He stopped, surprised by himself. "What expression?" Nora asked, still rolling, not looking at him, giving him room. "Like she was very patiently waiting for you to catch up," he said. Nora's mouth curved. "She would have been sharp about the bank situation," he said. "She always saw around corners. I think I would have liked her." He looked at her. "She would have liked you." Nora paused in her rolling. "Not long, just a beat, just a breath." Then she kept going. "I am not trying to be her," she said. "I want you to know that. I know that is sometimes what people expect when a man remarries. That the second wife is supposed to fill the shape of the first one." "You do not fill a shape," Edmund said. "You make new ones." She looked at him then. Something in her face that she did not often let him see. Something undefended. Something that was simply a woman heard and surprised by being heard. "That is the kindest thing you have said to me," she said. "I mean it. I know you do." She turned back to the pastry. "That is why it is kind." They stayed in the kitchen another hour. And Edmund thought that there was something quietly extraordinary about the fact that he had sat in this room for 6 years feeling only the weight of what was gone. And now he sat in it feeling something entirely different. Not replacement, not forgetting, something additive, something that existed alongside the grief rather than demanding it move. He went to bed that night feeling less alone than he had felt since 1879. The first break came from Declan. He came to the study on a Thursday evening with the look of a man who has found something he was not entirely sure he wanted to find. "Holt," Declan said, and put a piece of paper on the desk. Edmund picked it up and read. Preston Holt had been a bank representative in Cheyenne for 11 years. Clean record, no irregularities. The kind of steady, unremarkable career that looked good precisely because nothing looked wrong. But one of Edmund's contacts in Cheyenne had dug deeper, the way only a man who had grown up in a town and knew every family and every connection could dig. And what he had found was this. Preston Holt's sister had married into the Aldredges family 9 years ago. Not a close connection, a distant one. Easy to miss if you were not looking. And 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks before Holt's visit to Callaway Ranch, Holt had been transferred into a new supervisory position. A position that had been created by a vote of the bank board. A vote on which Harlan Aldredge had voted in favor. Edmund set the paper down. "Aldredge created the position," he said, "and filled it with Holt," Declan said. "Then sent him here." Edmund was very still. "And then the letter appears in our supply building with my exact loan figures in it." "Yes." "What does Aldredge want?" "The land." Declan said it plainly. Your north quarter connects to his east pasture. He has wanted that connection for 15 years. You turned him down in 1870 and again in 1872. Edmund confirmed it with a look. If the bank calls the loan and you have to sell, Declan said, you will not be turning anyone down. The land will go to whoever has money ready. Edmund sat back. This was the shape of it, not a sudden attack, a patient scheme, the kind that could only be built by someone willing to wait years for the right moment. Aldredges had waited until the market softened, waited until the loan terms were vulnerable, then moved Holt into position and sent him to Callaway Ranch to gather the specific information needed to push the board toward calling the loan. It was sophisticated, it was careful, and it explained something that had been nagging at Edmund since the letter appeared. Vivien's visit, he said. Declan looked at him. She came to the ranch the week after Holt left. I thought it was personal. Edmund said it slowly. Her father may have sent her to see how the ranch was running. Whether the financial pressure was showing yet. Whether I looked like a man who was struggling. He thought of Nora standing in the kitchens, calm and unhurried, sending Vivien away with her basket unreceived. He thought of what Vivien had seen, a ranch that ran smoothly, workers who were settled and fed, a woman at the center of it who gave away nothing in her expression. Vivien had gone back to her father and told him Callaway Ranch looked fine, which was why the letter had appeared afterward. They were trying to create visible pressure since the ranch was not showing it naturally. The gathering, Edmund said. 4 days, Declan said. Is Nora ready? You should ask her. He went to the kitchen. She was alone. The other women had gone home for the evening, and Nora was doing what she always did at this hour, the last of the preparation, the things that required quiet and concentration. Her hands moving through the familiar motions of her craft with the settled confidence of someone entirely in their element. She looked at his face when he came in. Tell me, she said. He told her all of it. Aldredges, Holt, the North Quarter, the board vote, 15 years of a patient plan. He laid it out in the same flat, direct way he had laid out the bank letter. Because she had earned that directness and because he did not know how to give her anything less. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He has been planning this for how long, she said. Best I can tell, 2 years of active setup. But the desire for the North Quarter has been there 15 years, and he used his own daughter's visit to assess the situation. That is what I think. Something crossed her face that was harder than anything he had seen on it before. Not anger exactly. Something cooler than anger. Vivien did not know, Nora said carefully, working through it. She came here because her father asked her to observe. She is not part of the scheme. She is a tool he used without telling her. Edmund had not thought of it that way. He thought of it now. Does that matter? He asked. It might, she said. It might matter very much depending on what happens at the gathering. What are you thinking? She turned back to her work. I am thinking that Harlan Aldredges has made a mistake. She said it slowly, working through each word. He is smart enough to build a 15-year plan. But he is not smart enough to understand that the most dangerous person in a room is not always the one with the most money. She was quiet for a moment. Sometimes it is the one who made the food. He looked at her. She almost smiled. 4 days, she said. Let me work. He let her work. And in those 4 days, as Nora and her 4 women moved through the kitchen with the quiet power of people who understood exactly what they were building and why, Edmund did something he had not done in 6 years. He stopped managing. He stopped absorbing problems in solitude and carrying them in silence and presenting the world with only the resolved version of himself. He told Declan the full shape of it. He told Jake and Amos and Cody enough to understand that what was coming mattered, that this gathering was not a social occasion but a statement, and that every man on this ranch was part of making that statement. He watched his men stand up straighter when they understood that. He watched them look at each other with the particular expression of people who have been trusted with something real. Nora had done that too. She had built people who knew how to be part of something, and now those people were going to help him fight for the thing they had all built together. On the evening before the gathering, Edmund came into the kitchen late. The preparations were as complete as they could be. The other women had gone home. Nora was sitting at the table with her coffee and her lists, reading through them one final time with the focused attention of a woman who had thought of everything she could think of and was checking once more to be sure. He poured coffee and sat down across from her. She set the lists aside. Are you afraid? He asked. He did not ask it often. He was not a man who asked it often. No, she said. Then, more honestly, not of failing. I am afraid of what it means if it works. He looked at her. If it works, she said, it means this is real. That this place is mine. That I belong here the way I have not belonged anywhere since I was a girl in Ohio watching my grandfather work his land. She looked at her hands on the table. That is a large thing to let yourself believe. It has a long way to fall if something goes wrong. He thought about that. Nothing is going to go wrong, he said. You do not know that. No, he said. I do not. But I know that whatever happens tomorrow, you are not going back to Iowa wondering if you were worth the investment. He held her eyes. You already know the answer to that. She looked at him for a long moment. That careful, precise intelligence working behind her eyes, taking him seriously the way she took everything seriously. Then she picked up her coffee cup. Get some sleep, Edmund, she said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. He went upstairs. He lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into night. And he thought about Harlan Aldredge sitting somewhere in his large house, patient and confident, waiting for a ranch to fall into his hands. He thought, you do not know what is coming for you. He thought, neither do I entirely. He thought, but she does, and that is enough. The morning of the gathering, Edmund came downstairs at 5 to find Nora already at the stove, and Ruth Ann and Ada and June at the counter, and Bess Whitfield working the secondary prep. And the kitchen had an energy that reminded him of the moments before a cattle drive when everything was loaded and the men were ready and the only thing left was to move. He stood in the doorway and watched for a moment without them seeing him. Nora was directing the room with quiet precision. A word here, a gesture there. Nothing raised, nothing performed. Just a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and trusted the people around her to do what they were capable of. He thought, I almost did not write back to that letter. He thought, I sat at this table with a cold cup of coffee and I almost decided that what I already had was enough. He thought about what Declan had told him months ago, that keeping everything running was not the same as being alive, and he understood now, standing in that doorway, what that meant. Not as a concept, as something he could feel. Nora looked up across the distance of the kitchen. She read his expression with the ease of someone who had been reading him for months. Breakfast is on the counter, she said. Eat before people start arriving. He ate. They started arriving at noon. By 2 in the afternoon, Callaway Ranch held more people than Edmund had seen on his property in 20 years. The community had come, truly come. Not the polite attendance of obligation, but the real presence of people who had heard something interesting was happening and wanted to be part of it. The food was the reason. Word had spread ahead of the event the way stories spread in a territory like this, from a neighbor's mention to a wife's curiosity to a traveler's comment, until people from 3 counties distant had rearranged their Saturday to drive to Callaway Ranch because someone had told them something was being cooked there that they would not see again in their lifetime. Nora had not exaggerated. What she and her 4 women had produced was something that had no easy category in Wyoming in 1885. It was not the simple, generous food of a cattle drive or the formal, aspirational food of a wealthy household trying to impress. It was food that felt like a place, like a specific, real-rooted place where people had been feeding each other for generations, where the recipes carried memory and the memory made the food mean more than the ingredients. Bread made with a technique her grandmother had carried across 2 states and refined over decades. Preserved foods that bore the particular taste of patience and craft. Dishes that required knowledge most cooks in this territory had never had occasion to acquire. Edmund watched people eat. He watched faces change. An old rancher named Comstock took a bite of Nora's bread and stopped chewing and looked at it the way a man looks at something that has just reminded him of something he had not known he had forgotten. A group of merchants from the eastern part of the territory gathered around the preserved foods table and were talking to each other in a way they had not been talking 10 minutes ago, animated and connected, the food having done what food does when it is made with real craft. It opened people up, and Nora moved through all of it, not performing hostess, not working the room in the way of someone trying to make an impression, just present, stopping to talk to people, answering questions about the food with the plain, honest pleasure of someone who loved what they made, asking questions in return, making people feel that this place was genuinely glad they were here. Prentice, the old rancher who had asked her about water tables at the Aldredge gathering, found her by the bread table and said, "Mrs. Callaway, I have been telling people about you for 2 weeks. What have you been telling them?" she asked. That this ranch finally has what it needed. He looked around the yard at the 200 people filling it. This is the heart of this community right here. This is what a gathering is supposed to feel like. Edmund was standing close enough to hear that. He said nothing, but he filed it with the precision he brought to everything that mattered. Harlan Aldredge arrived at 2. He came with his wife and Vivien, and 3 men Edmund identified within 5 minutes. 2 were investors from Cheyenne. The third was a man named Silas Crane, who served as legal representative for the bank board. They had come to see a ranch under pressure. They found a celebration. Aldredge's face was excellent. Years of careful social training kept it neutral. But Edmund had been watching men's faces in negotiations for 2 decades, and he saw the micro-adjustment that happened when Harlan Aldredge walked into that yard and saw 200 people eating and talking and laughing and looking at Callaway Ranch like it was the most important piece of land in the territory. Vivien saw it too. She was standing just behind her father, and she looked at the crowd, and then she looked at Nora moving through it, and something in her expression did something complicated. Edmund watched it happen. He walked forward to meet Harlan Aldredge. "Harlan," he extended his hand. "Glad you could make it." Aldredge's handshake was firm and practiced. "Quite a gathering, Edmund. My wife's work. She has a talent for bringing people together." He watched Aldredge's eyes move to Nora. "So I see," Aldredge said. The 2 investors behind him were also looking at the crowd, and Edmund could see them recalibrating in real time. This was not a ranch under financial duress. This was a ranch that was the center of its community. This was not a man you moved quietly against without the entire territory noticing. Silas Crane said something to one of the investors too low for Edmund to catch. The investor shook his head slightly. Edmund absorbed that and kept his expression easy. "Let me introduce you to some people," he said to Aldredges. "There is a man from the Northern Territory who has been asking about the kind of land partnerships you have been building." He gestured forward. "This way." He walked Harlan Aldredges directly into the center of the gathering, surrounded by 200 people who were eating his wife's food and feeling the particular warmth of people who have been genuinely welcomed somewhere. And he let the man feel the weight of what he had tried to undermine. He did it with a smile. He did it without saying a single word about any of it. The moment he had been waiting for came 2 hours later. He found it not where he expected, but where Nora had predicted. Vivien had found her. He saw them from across the yard. Nora standing near the bread table. Vivien approaching with the careful walk of a woman who has decided to do something difficult and is committed now and cannot turn back. Edmund moved toward them without hurrying. He needed to hear this. He caught it from 10 feet away. "My father sent Holt to your ranch," Vivien said. Her voice was controlled, but barely. Nora looked at her steadily. "I know. I did not know that when I visited. I came because he asked me to see how things were. He told me it was a social call. A welcome." She stopped. "He used me." "Yes," Nora said simply. "You knew." I suspected. Vivien's jaw tightened. "He wants your land. He has been working toward this for years. Using the bank, using Holt, using me." She said the last 2 words like they cost her something. "I found documents in his study 2 days ago. I was not looking for them. I was looking for a letter he had promised to give me, and I found what he has been building." Edmund was close enough now. Nora saw him. Vivien turned and saw him too. The 3 of them stood there, and the noise of 200 people filled the air around them. Edmund looked at the daughter of the man who had been trying to take his ranch for 15 years, and he saw a woman who had just discovered that her father was not the man she had believed him to be. "Vivien," he said. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the way that meant she was holding something back by will. "What did you find?" he said. "Documents," she said. "Correspondence between my father and Crane at the bank. A draft letter intended for the board, arguing that Callaway Ranch is insolvent and should have its loan called immediately." She paused, with figures that could only have come from Holt's visit here. "Do you have the documents?" Nora asked. Vivien looked at her. "The documents, Vivien," Nora said quietly. "Do you have them with you?" She reached into the small bag she was carrying. Her hands were not quite steady. She withdrew a folded set of papers and held them out. Nora took them. She looked at Edmund. He took them from her and looked at the first page and understood immediately what he was holding. Not just evidence of Aldredges' scheme, documentation of bank fraud. Correspondence between a board member and a bank representative that constituted a clear, legal, actionable case of manipulation of financial proceedings. This was not just a defense. This was the end of the threat entirely. He looked up at Vivien. "Why?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Because it is wrong," she said. "Whatever I thought about your marriage, whatever I wanted." She looked at Nora. "This is wrong, and I am not my father." Nora looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "Come inside. Have something to eat." Vivien stared at her. "You have done something hard today," Nora said. "You should eat." And because Nora said things directly and meant them completely, and because there was no calculation in her voice and no cruelty and no triumph, Vivien Aldredges did exactly that. She followed Nora into the Callaway Ranch kitchen, and she sat at the table built for 12, and Nora put bread and preserves in front of her, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. Outside, Edmund stood in the yard of his ranch with the documents in his hand and 200 people around him who were eating his wife's food and making his land feel like the center of something real. She said we would fight it in a room full of people, he thought. She was right. She was right about most things. He put the documents in his coat pocket and went to find Silas Crane. Crane was standing near the fence at the edge of the yard talking to one of the Cheyenne investors in the low, careful voice of a man conducting business while pretending not to conduct business. Edmund had known men like Crane his entire life. Men who operated in the spaces between things, between what was legal and what was wrong, between what could be proven and what everyone understood. They were useful to powerful people because they were technically clean. You could not point at Silas Crane and say that man did something criminal. You could only say that man was always nearby when something criminal happened and somehow always left before the damage was visible. Edmund walked toward him at a pace that said, "I am not hurrying, but I am coming, and you should not try to leave." Crane saw him coming. Edmund watched the calculation happen on the man's face. The quick assessment of the yard, the 200 people, the distance to the gate. He watched Crane decide that leaving would look worse than staying. Smart enough to stay, not smart enough to understand that staying was also a trap. "Mr. Crane," Edmund said. "Mr. Callaway." Crane's handshake was firm and professional. The handshake of a man with nothing to hide except that everyone had something to hide, and Edmund was currently holding proof of it in his coat pocket. Remarkable gathering. "My wife's work," Edmund said. "She has a gift, so I am told." Crane glanced toward the kitchen. "I did not know she was involved in the management side of the ranch." "She is involved in everything," Edmund said pleasantly. "That is what a partner is." He let the word sit there. Let Crane hear it. The investor beside Crane had gone slightly quiet. "I want to show you something," Edmund said. He pulled the documents from his coat, not all of them, one page. He held it so that Crane could see it, and the investor could not quite see it, and he watched Crane's face with the attention of a man who had spent 4 decades reading faces. What he saw was not the face of a man looking at something unfamiliar. What he saw was recognition, and recognition was everything. "Where did you get that?" Crane said. It was not quite a question. "Does it matter?" Edmund said. Crane stopped. He looked at the investor, who was studying the middle distance with the careful attention of someone who had decided he did not want to know what was happening 6 inches to his left. "Mr. Fitch," Edmund said, "would you excuse us a moment?" Fitch excused himself with the speed of a man grateful for permission to leave. Edmund and Crane stood together in the yard of Callaway Ranch with 200 people around them who were completely unaware that something was being settled very quietly in their midst. "Here is what I know," Edmund said. He kept his voice level, conversational, the voice he used when he wanted someone to understand that there was no emotion in what he was saying, only fact. "I know that Harlan Aldredge sent Preston Holt to my ranch to access my financial records. I know that information was used to prepare a case for the bank board to call my loan. I know that you were the legal mechanism through which that case was going to move." He folded the page and put it back. "I know all of that because I have the correspondence." Crane was very still. "I am not going to the sheriff," Edmund said. "Not today." Crane's stillness shifted slightly. "Not relief. Something more careful than relief. The loan terms," Edmund said, "will be renegotiated, not called. Renegotiated on terms that reflect the actual standing of this ranch, which, as you can see, is somewhat healthier than the picture that was being assembled for the board." He gestured toward the yard, the people, the food, the vitality of a ranch that was nobody's definition of a failing operation. "And Harlan Aldredge's position on the bank board will become untenable because the correspondence I have makes his involvement impossible to explain." "You are asking me to," Crane began. "I am telling you what is going to happen," Edmund said. "You can be part of the legal process that makes it happen correctly, which protects your standing. Or you can be part of the investigation that follows if I take this to the territorial authorities, which does not." He paused. "You are a man who knows how to be on the right side of things at the right moment, Mr. Crane. This is one of those moments." Crane looked at him for a long time. He was smart. Edmund had never underestimated him. He was running the full calculation, what he could protect, what he could not, what the documents contained, what Edmund could actually prove, what a territorial investigation would cost a man in his position. "The Aldredge connection," Crane said carefully. "I was engaged by the board as legal representative. My instruction came through the board process. I did not know the specifics of how the information was gathered." "I know that too," Edmund said. "I am not asking you to fall on a sword. I am asking you to stop the process and support the renegotiation. That is all." Crane looked at the yard again. "Your wife organized this," he said. "Yes, she knew about Aldredge, about the board. She figured it out before I did," Edmund said. "If I am being honest." Something moved across Crane's face that was not quite admiration and not quite discomfort. Somewhere between the two. "Aldredge told me this ranch was poorly managed," he said. "That Callaway had let things slip since his wife died, that the workforce was demoralized and the finances were deteriorating." "And what do you see?" Edmund said. Crane looked at the crowd, at the food tables, at the men from the ranch moving through the gathering with the ease of people who felt they belonged somewhere, at the energy that Nora had built out of bread and honesty and the daily accumulation of small, careful acts of attention. "I see a man," Crane said slowly, "who was very poorly assessed." "Yes," Edmund said. "He was." A pause. "I will talk to the board," Crane said. "The renegotiation. I will support it. I appreciate that." "And Aldredge?" "Aldredge is his own problem now," Edmund said. "I have what I need." He left Crane by the fence and walked back into the crowd. He moved through the gathering the way he had been learning to move through things since Nora arrived, stopping to speak, asking questions, listening with real attention rather than the performative attention of a man who was simply waiting for the interaction to end. And he noticed that something had shifted in how people were responding to him. He could not pin it to a specific moment, but people were looking at him differently than they had at the Aldredge gathering. There he had been Edmund Callaway, wealthy, respected, and somewhat remote. Here he was something else. Something that had to do with the food on the tables and the workers who greeted guests by name, and the sense pervading the entire gathering like the smell of good bread. The Callaway Ranch was a place where people mattered. He had not built that. She had. He found her at the far end of the yard talking to Prentice, who was apparently telling her something long and involved about his grandfather's farm in Tennessee that she was listening to with complete, unhurried attention as if she had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. Which was not even slightly true. He waited. She caught his eye over Prentice's shoulder. He gave her the smallest nod. He watched the information travel across her face. Not a reaction exactly, more like a settling, the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for confirmation of something they already knew and can now stop waiting. Prentice eventually finished his story. Nora thanked him warmly, asked one follow-up question that made the old man light up entirely, and then excused herself and walked to Edmund. Crane, she said. Done. Aldredges. His position on the board will not survive the month. She nodded. She looked at the yard, at the 200 people eating her food in the afternoon light of a Wyoming October. Then she said, Vivien is still inside. Is she all right? She cried. Nora said, in the kitchen. She tried not to. I gave her bread and I did not say anything about it. Edmund looked at her. She did not know, Nora said, about the scheme. She genuinely did not know. Her father used her the way he used Holt, the way he used the bank process. She was a piece of it. She stopped. That does not change what he did. But it changes what she is. Edmund was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do about Harlan? Nora asked. He had been thinking about this since Crane walked away. Nothing criminal, he said. Not because he does not deserve it. Because a criminal proceeding takes a year and costs money and puts this ranch in the newspapers as a place of conflict instead of a place of strength. He looked at the yard. What I am going to do is let the bank board see the correspondence. Let them handle their own member. The Aldredges family's standing in this county depends on their relationship with that board. When that relationship changes, everything else follows. He loses the leverage, Nora said. He loses the leverage, Edmund confirmed. And the land stays where it is. She was quiet for a moment. You are being generous with him. I am being strategic. She looked at him. Those are not mutually exclusive. He almost smiled. No, he said, they are not. They stood together in the yard of the ranch that had been in his family for over 20 years. And Edmund felt something that had nothing to do with strategy or bank boards or the particular satisfaction of a threat that had been neutralized. It was simpler than any of that. It was the feeling of standing beside someone who had stood beside him through the whole of something hard, and had not once asked for credit in the handling of it, and had simply been there, thinking alongside him, filling in the things he could not see from where he was standing. Are you hungry? She said. He looked at her. You have not eaten since this morning, she said. He followed her inside. The afternoon wound down the way good gatherings wind down. Gradually, people leaving with the reluctance of those who have been somewhere that felt genuinely good and are not quite ready to return to the ordinary. Edmund stood at the gate and said goodbye to each family as they left. 3 separate men told him this was the best gathering the county had held in 20 years. 2 women asked Nora for the bread recipe. Prentice shook Edmund's hand at the gate and said, Your wife is something else, Callaway. Yes, Edmund said, she is. Hold on to her. I intend to. By 5 o'clock the yard was empty except for the Callaway household. Ruth Ann and Ada and June and Bess were cleaning up with the efficient solidarity of women who had worked hard together toward something real. Declan was walking the property with the quiet vigilance of a man who had been holding his breath for 2 weeks and was only now starting to let it out. Jake was carefully, with his healing shoulder guarded, helping fold the tables, which Edmund noticed and did not comment on because Jake needed to contribute and stopping him would cost more than it saved. And Nora was in the kitchen. He found her at the sink washing the last of the large baking pans, her sleeves pushed up and her back to the door. She looked exhausted in the way of someone who had spent 10 days running towards something at full speed and had just crossed the line and was not sure yet how to stop. He picked up a cloth and started drying. She heard him but did not turn. You do not have to do that, I know. He dried the pan she handed him. She washed. He dried. The kitchen was warm and quiet around them. Outside the window, the light was going gold and flat, the way Wyoming light went in October. That particular end-of-day quality that made everything look both more beautiful and more temporary than it actually was. Nora, he said. She turned off the water. She dried her hands on her apron slowly and then she turned to face him. He had planned something. He had been in the back of his mind arranging words since the afternoon, since he had stood in the yard after talking to Crane, and understood fully what she had done and what it had cost her to do it. He had assembled a version of what he wanted to say that was orderly and correct and expressed what he meant without leaving him exposed in ways he was not sure how to manage. He forgot all of it. You saved this ranch, he said. She opened her mouth. Do not tell me you did not, he said. Do not minimize it. Do not say it was the food or the timing or that I would have figured it out anyway. You came here with 1 suitcase, and in 6 weeks you learned every man's name and fixed what was broken and planned the gathering and thought of Crane before I did and brought Vivien into this kitchen when anyone else would have kept her out. He stopped, studied something in himself. You saved it. She was very still. But that is not what I want to say, he continued. The ranch matters and I am grateful, but that is not. He set down the drying cloth. He looked at her directly, the way she had always looked at him, with the undeflected honesty that she had walked in with on the first day and never put down. I was managing, he said, before you came. I want you to understand that word the way I mean it. Managing, keeping everything running, keeping the finances in order and the men working and the cattle healthy and the property maintained. He paused. Managing, she was watching him. I was not alive, he said. I did not know that until someone came and made the difference visible. He took a slow breath. You made the difference visible, Nora. The kitchen was very quiet. I know I am not a man who says things easily, he said. I know I show things more than I say them, and I know that is not always enough, and I know you deserve to hear things said clearly, so I am saying it clearly. He looked at her with the full weight of everything the last 6 weeks had been, and everything the 6 years before them had cost him. I love you, not because of what you have done for this ranch, not because of what you saved, because of who you are while you are doing it. Because of the way you told Vivien Aldredges the truth when most people would have given her nothing. Because of the way you sat with Jake while he found the courage to ask for help. Because of the way you said partner and meant it before I understood what the word was supposed to mean. He stopped. I love you, he said again, and I should have said it sooner, and I am saying it now. She looked at him for a long time. He watched her process it, the careful, precise intelligence doing what it always did, taking it seriously, giving it the respect of actual consideration rather than reaction. He had learned not to read that pause as hesitation. He had learned that the pause was the evidence that she was really hearing him. I came here, she said slowly, and I told you I was not pretty. He nodded. And you said you were introducing yourself. She looked at her hands for a moment. I have thought about that moment many times since. What you meant by it. What did you decide? That you meant something I was not built to expect. That the terms I had been using to evaluate my own worth were not the terms you were using. She was quiet for a moment. That takes a long time to believe when you have spent your whole life being assessed a certain way. I know, he said. Take as long as you need. She looked at him. I do not need more time, she said. I have been there for a while. I was just making sure it was real before I said so. Is it real? He asked. Yes, she said. It is very real. Then say it. She looked at him with the direct, undeflected, completely unperformed honesty that was her most fundamental quality. The thing that had been in the letter and in every conversation and every morning and every kitchen and every difficult thing they had done together. And she said, I love you, Edmund Callaway. I love you the way I love what is real. Which means completely and without reservation and without any interest in pretending it is something other than what it is. He crossed the kitchen. She did not move back. He took her hand, the hand that had made bread for 40 workers, and checked Jake's shoulder and written 3 pages of plans and handed him bank letters and Vivien Aldredges documents and mixed dough at 4 in the morning while thinking through problems he had not yet fully seen. He held it between both of his, and that was enough for now. That was something he had been building toward for 6 weeks without knowing that was what he was doing, and arriving there felt like setting down something heavy he had carried so long he had forgotten it was weight. Declan found him an hour later sitting on the porch. He came and sat beside him without being invited, which was the prerogative of a man who had worked beside you for 14 years, and he said nothing for a while. Crane, Declan said finally. Dealt with. Aldredges. Being dealt with. A pause. The ranch, Declan said, is fine, Edmund said. We will be fine. The loan gets renegotiated. The board loses 1 member. The North Quarter stays where it is. Declan was quiet for a moment. She did that. We did it, Edmund said. He looked at Declan. She did most of it. Declan shook his head slowly. I have been on this ranch 14 years. What she built here in 6 weeks. The men, the gathering, the food, figuring out Aldredges before you had the evidence. He was quiet. I have never seen anything like it. Neither have I, Edmund said. She know that? I told her tonight. Declan leaned back. Was she gracious about it? She told me she loved me, Edmund said. And then she told me to eat something. Declan smiled. It was a rare enough thing that it changed his whole face. Good, he said. That is exactly right. They sat on the porch in the October evening, and inside the ranch house they could hear the sounds of the women finishing the kitchen, the particular warm domestic sounds that Edmund had not heard on this porch in 6 years. And he thought about what he had said to Nora about managing, about the difference between keeping things running and being alive. He understood it now not as a concept, but as something he could feel in his chest, present and specific and real. He was alive again. That was the thing she had done. Not the gathering, not the strategy, not the documents or the loan or the handling of Vivien Aldredges with bread and silence in a warm kitchen. Those were all real and they all mattered. But underneath all of it, the thing she had actually done was simpler and larger than any of it. She had walked into his life with one worn suitcase and the honest expectation of disappointment, and she had refused, stubbornly, daily, without fanfare, to disappear into the edges of his world the way everyone had assumed she would. She had made herself necessary not by being irreplaceable, but by being present. Fully, genuinely, unperformatively present, and somewhere in the last 6 weeks, without deciding to, he had started organizing his days around the fact of her. Clyde, he said. Declan. Yeah. Tell the men tomorrow that the situation is resolved. They do not need details, but they have been carrying the tension of it, and they should know it is over. I will tell them. A pause. Jake's shoulder is healing well. I know. He told me, Declan said. He never tells anyone anything. Nora sat with him while he did it. Declan shook his head slowly one more time. She is something else, Edmund. Yes, Edmund said. She is. 3 days after the gathering, a letter arrived from the bank. Not from the board. From the manager directly. Edmund read it at the kitchen table with his coffee, and when he finished, he set it down and sat with it for a moment. Nora put eggs in front of him without being asked. The loan terms, she said, renegotiated. He looked up. Better terms than the original, actually. Crane apparently made a compelling case to the board for the ranch's community standing as a factor in its creditworthiness. He paused. The manager's letter mentions a review of certain board procedures. Diplomatic language for someone showed them something they needed to see. She nodded. And Aldredges? Resigned from the board, Edmund said. Effective immediately. Health reasons, officially. She picked up her coffee cup. Vivien came to the kitchen this morning, she said. Before you were up. She stayed about 20 minutes. Edmund waited. She wanted to apologize, Nora said, for the way she looked at me when she came to call that first time. She said she had known what she was doing and had told herself it was acceptable because... She paused. Because women like her are taught that they are permitted to look at women like me that way. And she knows now that is wrong. What did you say? I told her she could come to supper next Friday if she wanted to practice doing differently. He stared at her. She is not a bad person, Nora said. She was given bad information and bad permission. That is not the same thing as bad character. She shrugged. Besides, she handed us the documents. That deserves something. He looked at her for a long moment. You are more generous than I am, he said. No, she said. I just have a different accounting system. He picked up his fork. What does that mean? It means I do not keep score by what people have done to me, she said. I keep score by who they are willing to become. She looked at him. It has served me better. He ate his eggs. He thought about 30 years of a woman who had been looked at and found lacking by every accounting system that valued the wrong things, who had developed her own system out of necessity, and who had arrived in Wyoming with that system intact and proceeded to apply it to everyone she met. The young ranch hand who felt unseen, the foreman who worried about his boss, the damaged shoulder that needed rest, the bank plot that needed dismantling, the daughter of the enemy who needed a second chance. He thought, what kind of life leaves a person that generous and that clear-eyed at the same time? And the answer was a hard one. The answer was the kind of life that strips away everything that is not necessary and leaves only what is true. Nora, he said. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for coming here. She was quiet for a moment. You wrote back, she said. I wrote the most honest letter I had ever written in my life, and you wrote back. You did not have to. I know I did not have to. She looked at him with the steady, clear look that still, after 6 weeks, surprised him with its directness. Then I should be the one thanking you. He shook his head. Let us call it even. And for the first time since he had stood on a train platform not knowing what to feel, Edmund Callaway looked at his wife across a kitchen table and felt the specific, uncomplicated, slightly terrifying feeling of a man who has stopped managing his life and started living it. Outside, the ranch was awake and moving. 23 men going about the work of a property that was still standing, still running, still his. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee and eggs and the particular warmth of a room where someone had been up before dawn, caring about something. He sat at his own table and breathed it in. He thought, this is what belonging feels like. He had forgotten. He was glad to remember. The first snow came 3 weeks after the gathering, not the heavy snow of deep winter. The early snow, the kind that arrived in Wyoming like a warning, light and fast and gone by afternoon, leaving the ground damp and the air carrying the particular cold clarity that meant everything was about to change. Edmund stood on the porch and watched it come in, and thought about the bank letter in his desk drawer with the renegotiated terms, and about Harlan Aldredges' name no longer appearing in the board correspondence that Crane had sent over last week, and about the north quarter of his land sitting exactly where it had always sat, unbothered and uncontested and entirely his. He thought about all of it, and then he went inside to get coffee, and Nora was already at the stove. She handed him a cup without turning around. Snow, he said, I know. Early this year. 2 weeks early, she said. I asked Declan. He said it has been coming earlier every year for the past 4. She knew that because she had asked. She asked everything. In 3 months, she had accumulated a working knowledge of this ranch that most men took 2 years to build. Not because she had exceptional intelligence, though she did, but because she was constitutionally incapable of accepting vagueness when specificity was available. She wanted to know the actual number, the real name, the genuine history. She wanted to know things the way they were, not the way they were easier to describe. He sat at the kitchen table and drank his coffee and watched her move around the kitchen, and he thought, I have been watching this woman work for 3 months, and it still surprises me. Not her competence. He had known about that in the first week. What surprised him was that the watching never got ordinary. She was always somehow specific. Present in a way that demanded you notice her without ever asking to be noticed. What are you thinking about, she said. You, he said. She turned, looked at him with the assessing directness that still caught him slightly off balance after 3 months. What about me? He thought about how to say it. He was not a man who said things carelessly, and this was not a careful thing. This was real, and real things required more precision than careless things, not less. That you occupy the space you are in, he said. You do not drift. You are always right there, right in the thing, present in it. She was quiet for a moment. My mother used to say I had no room in my head for anything that was not real. She said it like it was a problem to be corrected. It was not a criticism, Edmund said. The corner of her mouth moved. No, she said, I suppose it was not. She turned back to the stove. He watched the snow come down outside the window and dissolve before it hit the ground. He thought, I almost did not write back. And then he thought, I am glad I did, with the full weight of someone who understands what the alternative would have been, not as an abstraction. as a specific, daily, irreplaceable thing. This kitchen, this woman, this life that had been waiting inside his own house for him to stop managing it long enough to actually live it. The story of Edmund Callaway and Nora Hewitt was told in Ridgerest County for many years afterward, the way communities tell the stories that matter to them with the particular compression of time that memory requires, smoothing over the daily complexity and keeping the essential shape. They would say the wealthiest rancher in the county married a plain woman from Iowa and she saved his ranch and he learned what beauty actually was. That version was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was this. A man who had been managing his life for 6 years instead of living it received a letter from a woman who had spent her whole life being looked at and found lacking. And he wrote back, not because he was wise enough to know what he was inviting, but because something in her honesty had reached through the careful distance he kept between himself and everything that could hurt him and touched something real. And she came. She came with one worn suitcase and the honest expectation of disappointment, and she found instead a man who listened. A kitchen that needed life breathed into it. 23 men who needed someone to know their names. A financial threat that needed to be outmaneuvered with community rather than capital. A young woman who needed bread and a second chance. She found all of that, and she was exactly what all of that needed, because she had spent 30 years becoming precisely that person in context where it was never appreciated. And it turned out the preparation was real, even when the appreciation was absent. And Edmund Callaway found a woman who did not want his money or his land or the social standing of his name, who came to his kitchen table when he had a bank letter he could not solve alone, who sat with him in supply rooms and wrote numbers in ledgers when she could see he needed company more than he needed help, who said partner before he understood the word and built everything around it. He found a woman who could not be managed, could not be kept at a comfortable distance, could not be reduced to what she cooked or what she organized or what she looked like. He found a woman who could not be made invisible, and that was the thing the legend left out. Nora Hewitt had always been extraordinary. She had always been the most capable, most clear-eyed, most honestly human person in every room she had ever stood in. The world had simply been looking in the wrong direction. Edmund Callaway looked in the right direction. That was all he did, and it turned out to be enough. On a winter morning in Wyoming, in the kitchen that had been silent for 6 years and was silent no longer, Edmund Callaway found his wife making bread before the sun came up. He stood in the doorway and watched her hands move through the familiar motions of a craft she had practiced her whole life. She heard him. She did not turn. She said, "Coffee is on." He poured 2 cups. He put one beside her on the counter. She reached for it without looking. Their hands touched in the dark, briefly, the particular casual intimacy of 2 people who have stopped being careful with each other. And she went back to her bread and he stood beside her and drank his coffee, and the ranch outside was waking up the way it always woke up. The sound of men moving, the particular creak of the barn, the low, distant voice of someone speaking to a horse. The kitchen was warm. It smelled of bread. It was entirely, unmistakably, irreversibly alive. She had said once on a train platform in Wyoming in the voice of a woman preparing for disappointment, "I ain't pretty, Mr. Callaway, but I can cook." And the rancher who had heard that and felt something crack open in his chest had spent the months since understanding what the crack had let in. Not beauty, something that lasted longer than beauty. Something that built instead of decorated. Something that once found made every previous definition of valuable seem like a language learned in a country you would never return to. Nora Hewitt Callaway was not plain. She had never been plain. She had simply been surrounded for 30 years by people who did not know how to read what they were looking at. Edmund Callaway knew how to read it, and what he read every morning in that kitchen, every evening at that table, every night in the particular quiet of a house that had stopped being empty and started being full, was the most valuable thing he had ever owned. Not the land, not the cattle, not the name or the wealth or the standing that the county accorded a man who had built an empire out of Wyoming dirt. A life, an actual inhabited, genuinely lived life, built by 2 people who had told each other the truth from the very beginning and had never once stopped. That was the story of Edmund Callaway and Nora Hewitt, and it was true from the first word to the last.